Number 1. The Oracle of Trophonius. In the hills of Boeotia, in central Greece, near the town of Lebedia, there was a hole in the ground that broke the people who entered it. Not a legend about a hole. A real one, described by a man who claimed to have climbed inside himself. The site sat on the lower slopes of Mount Helicon, near the gorge of the Herkina River, and for close to 1,000 years it drew people who wanted to know the future badly enough to risk their minds for it. The oracle belonged to Trophonius, a hero remembered as an architect, the same figure said to have built the temple of Apollo at Delphi with his brother. When he died, the earth was believed to have swallowed him, and where it swallowed him, it kept speaking. Almost everything we know comes from one source. Pausanias, a Greek traveler writing in the 2nd century CE, devoted a long passage in Book 9 of his Guide to Greece to the ritual, and he did something rare. He went down himself. Before anyone could consult the oracle, they had to spend days in purification. They lodged in a building sacred to good fortune and a guardian spirit. They bathed in the cold river. They sacrificed to a long list of gods, and priests examined the entrails to see whether Trophonius would even receive them. If the signs were wrong, you were turned away at the edge. If the signs were right, the real ordeal began. The seeker drank from 2 springs. The first was called lethe, forgetfulness, to wipe the mind clean of every earlier thought. The second was mnemosyne, memory, so that whatever came next would be remembered forever. Then they were led to the chamber itself, an artificial pit shaped like a bread oven, only about 6 feet deep, entered through an opening so narrow a grown person could barely fit. The seeker lay on the ground, holding cakes of honey in both hands, and pushed their feet into the hole. And then, Pausanias says, they were pulled in, not lowered. Pulled as a fast river drags a swimmer under, feet first, into the dark. What happened inside, no 2 accounts agree on. Some learned the future by seeing, some by hearing. All of them came back out the same narrow hole, feet first again, and all of them came back changed. Pausanias reports that people emerged paralyzed with terror, unable to recognize themselves or anyone around them. The priests would catch them and set them on a seat called the Throne of Memory, and only slowly, as the fear drained away, could the seekers say what they had seen. There was even a proverb for a person who never smiled, who wore a permanent look of gloom. The Greeks said he had been down to the cave of Trophonius. The place had left a mark on the language itself. So what was really happening down there? The mainstream reading treats it as controlled ritual theater, layered over genuine psychological collapse. Days of fasting, cold, fear, and total darkness in a cramped space could produce dissociation strong enough to feel like death and return. A second theory looks for a physical trigger, gases seeping into the pit, or the drifting images of a half-waking mind. A third simply points to suggestion, the power of belief and dread to manufacture an experience. Here's the part that keeps modern archaeologists out. The true chamber has never been securely found. The medieval castle of Levadia sits over the sacred ground, and beneath it, the pit Pausanias described remains lost, which means the one cave that reliably terrified everyone who entered is a cave no one can enter now, and it is far from the strangest place on this list. Number 2. Cueva de los Tallos. Deep in the eastern jungles of Ecuador, on the Amazon side of the Andes, there is a cave that people have fought over for half a century without ever proving what is inside. It sits in the province of Morona Santiago, in the territory of the Shuar people, and its name comes from the Tallos, the oil birds that nest in its darkness, and that the Shuar have long harvested. The main entrance is not a doorway. It is a vertical shaft, roughly 63 meters straight down, so the only way in is by rope, dropping into blackness with the jungle shrinking to a coin of light above you. The cave became world famous in 1973, when the author Erich von Däniken published a book claiming that hidden inside was a metal library, shelves of engraved gold plates recording the knowledge of a lost civilization. His source was a man named Juan Morich, who had claimed a few years earlier, in 1969, to have found tunnels, golden artifacts, and books made of metal beneath the earth. The story was irresistible, and it drew serious attention. In 1976, one of the largest cave expeditions ever mounted descended into Cueva de los Tallos. It was a joint British and Ecuadorian effort, with over 100 people, soldiers, scientists, and cavers, and its honorary leader was the astronaut Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon. Armstrong went down into the main chamber. The press went wild, and the expedition found real things: birds, insects, some evidence that humans had used the cave in the past, pottery, traces of activity. What it did not find was a metal library. No gold shelves, no engraved plates, no lost archive. Morich later insisted that the true treasure cave was a different entrance the expedition had never visited, an argument that can never quite be disproved, because there is always another passage. Some of the artifacts tied to his claims ended up in a collection in the city of Cuenca, and most experts regard those as modern folk art rather than ancient relics. Believers point to the shape of the cave. Parts of it have unusually flat walls and sharp right angles, and to some eyes that looks manufactured, cut by hands. Geologists have a plainer answer. Limestone fractures along flat plains when it breaks, and those natural joints can produce walls that look deceptively squared off. There are 3 ways to read this place. The mainstream view is a natural cave with modest, genuine ancient use. The Shuar view is a sacred space, inhabited by spirits, to be guarded from outsiders. And the fringe view is the lost archive that will not die. Reaching the cave means long travel through the jungle and the permission of the Shuar, who have every reason to keep strangers out. Between the deep shaft, the guardianship, and the legend that refuses to fade, few researchers ever go in. And the next place is one that people feared for a very different reason. Number 3. The Well of Barhout. In the desert of eastern Yemen, in the province of Al-Mahra, near the border with Oman, the flat ground simply opens. There is no mountain, no dramatic canyon, just a circle of darkness about 30 meters across, punched into the plain, dropping somewhere between 100 and 112 meters straight down. Locals call it Bir Barhout, the Well of Barhout, and for as long as anyone can remember, they have called it something else too, a prison for jinn, the malevolent spirits of Arabian tradition. People believed that to go near it was to invite misfortune, that the pit could swallow whatever came close, that it exhaled the smell of the underworld. For generations, no one went in. The fear did its job. It was only in September of 2021 that a team from the Movile Cave exploration team finally rigged ropes and pulleys and descended all the way to the bottom, becoming the first documented people to stand at the base of the Well of Hell. They found no jinn. What they found was a natural cavern floor scattered with snakes, the bones and bodies of animals that had fallen in, and formations built by dripping water, including cave pearls, small polished spheres that grow grain by grain over enormous spans of time. There was no overpowering stench. The hellish smell that folklore promised was not there. The pit is a sinkhole, formed the ordinary way, by water slowly dissolving limestone over hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years. Before the descent, a Yemeni geologist named Salah Babhair, who directed the region's geological survey, spoke publicly about the well's depth and the mystery that surrounded it, admitting that even scientists did not fully understand it. Part of the reason is simple. Yemen has been torn by conflict, and the region is remote, so careful study has been almost impossible. The jinn legend itself is genuinely ancient, reaching back into pre-Islamic Arabian belief about spirits that haunt the empty, desolate places of the world. There are no built artifacts here, no carvings, no temple. What makes the Well of Barhout ancient is its folklore and its geology, not the hand of any craftsman. The 2021 team monitored the air for oxygen as they went, aware that deep pits can trap bad air, and they used full technical equipment because the walls are sheer, offering nothing to climb. When the descent made news around the world, the framing was always the same: scientists entering the Well of Hell. You can read the pit three ways: as geology, an ordinary if dramatic sinkhole; as folklore, a forbidden threshold to the spirit world; as sensation, a place of strange smells and swallowed things that mostly dissolve on inspection. For centuries, not a single human had touched its floor. And even now, almost no one has. The next cave is one you could not survive without a mask. Number 4. Movile Cave. Near the town of Mangalia in southeastern Romania, close to the Black Sea coast, there is a cave whose air can kill you. It was found in 1986 by a Romanian scientist named Cristian Lascu, who was surveying the ground for a planned power station and broke into a world no human had ever seen, because Movile Cave had been sealed. For something like 5 to 5.5 million years, it had been cut off from the surface, closed under layers of impermeable clay and rock, its atmosphere completely separate from the sky above. Inside, the air is wrong in every way that matters. Oxygen sits at only about 7 to 10%, roughly half of what you breathe now. Carbon dioxide is high, and the air carries hydrogen sulfide and methane, gases that are actively poisonous. Nothing about this environment should support life, and yet it teems with it. The whole ecosystem runs not on sunlight, but on chemistry. Microbes draw their energy by oxidizing the sulfur and methane in the water, building floating mats of bacterial film, and everything else eats those mats. It is a food web with no sun at its base, sealed away for millions of years. More than 50 species have been identified in the cave, and over 30 of them exist nowhere else on Earth. They are the products of millions of years of evolution in total darkness: blind, colorless, strange, a water scorpion, leeches, spiders, pseudoscorpions, woodlice, centipedes, all of them pale and eyeless. Reaching the animals means diving through sulfidic water into pockets of air trapped in the rock, breathing gases that would be dangerous to linger in. The microbiologist Serban Sarbu is among the scientists who characterized this sulfur-based world, and researchers who study it can only stay a short time before the air forces them out. Access is locked down. Romanian authorities allow only a small number of scientists inside, and for good reason, both because the cave could poison a careless visitor and because a single careless visitor could poison the cave. Movile has become one of the most important sites on the planet for a specific question: whether life can exist without sunlight. Because if it can survive here, it might survive in the dark oceans beneath the ice of Europa or in the deep rock of Mars. It is studied the way scientists study deep-sea hydrothermal vents, as a template for life in the most hostile places imaginable. The toxic gas, the low oxygen, the flooded passages, and the strict permits together make Movile one of the least entered caves in the world. Between poison and preservation, almost no one goes down. The next cave was closed for a reason that is entirely human. Number 5. Naj Tunich. In the Maya Mountains of southeastern Guatemala, near the border with Belize, a limestone cave holds some of the finest ancient Maya art ever found, and it is sealed behind a locked gate because of what people did to it. The cave is called Naj Tunich, and it came to the attention of scholars in 1980, revealing walls covered in painted figures and hieroglyphic texts. The epigrapher Andrea Stone documented the imagery, and what emerged was extraordinary. Elegant painted scenes of ball players, gods, ritual, and dense blocks of glyphs, most of them dating to the late Classic period, around the 8th century CE. To understand why the cave matters, you have to understand what caves meant to the Maya. They were not just holes in the rock. They were entrances to Xibalba, the underworld, the realm of the dead and of the gods who ruled it. To descend into a cave was to step toward that other world. The texts painted on the walls of Naj Tunich record exactly that kind of crossing. They name individuals. They give dates in the Maya calendar. They describe pilgrimages, journeys that literate elites made across real distances to reach this remote and sacred place and perform rituals in the dark. This was not a dwelling. No one lived here. It was ceremonial ground, reached deliberately by people who could read and write. Then came 1989. Vandals entered the cave and defaced some of its most important paintings, destroying images that had survived more than 1,000 years. It was a catastrophe for Maya archaeology, an irreplaceable loss. In response, Guatemalan authorities sealed the cave with a gate and closed it to the public. Andrea Stone's 1995 book, Images from the Underworld, remains the definitive record of what the walls held, in some cases the only record of paintings that no longer exist. Radiocarbon dating and the inscriptions themselves show that the Maya visited across multiple episodes over the Classic period, and some of the texts name lords and places tied to known Maya kingdoms, helping historians map the politics of the region. There are competing ways to frame the cave. The mainstream archaeological view is elite ritual pilgrimage space, a destination for ceremony. The cosmological view, held by the Maya themselves, is that this was a genuine threshold to the underworld, and there are fringe claims of hidden knowledge, unsupported by any evidence. What unites them is the sense that Naj Tunich was never meant to be casually entered, and after 1989, it barely can be. The black paint, likely carbon-based, deteriorates in the humid cave air, and every visit is a risk. Between sacred belief and the scars of vandalism, almost no one goes inside now. The next site is not one cave, but hundreds, and no one knows why they exist at all. Number 6. The Erdstall Tunnels. Beneath the fields and villages of Bavaria and Austria, and scattered across parts of Central Europe, there are thousands of tunnels that no one can fully explain. They are called Erdställe, and there may be around 700 in Bavaria alone, and up to 500 in Austria, though the true count is uncertain because many have collapsed or been lost. Most are thought to date to the medieval period, roughly the 10th to 13th centuries, but dating them is genuinely difficult, and that difficulty is the heart of the mystery. These are not comfortable passages. They are very low and very narrow, often forcing a person to crawl on hands and knees, and they include a signature feature that gives many people pause. The schlupf, a tight vertical squeeze hole connecting one level to another, barely large enough for a human body to pass through. Once you are inside, the tunnels tend to lead nowhere useful. They dead end. They loop back. They open into cramped little chambers and then stop. There is no obvious practical purpose, no clear destination, nothing that reads like storage or defense in the ordinary sense. The folklore around them is dark. Local names include Schrazalok, which translates roughly to goblin hole, and traditions connect the tunnels to spirits, to elves, to the souls of the dead. Researchers have proposed a range of purposes: refuges to hide in during danger, storage spaces, cult or ritual sites, or what some have called soul houses, spaces tied to folk beliefs about where the dead might dwell or pass. The trouble is that the tunnels are almost always empty. There are no consistent artifacts inside, which makes both dating and interpretation maddening. Radiocarbon work and the surrounding context generally point to a high medieval origin, and the researcher Heinrich Kusch, among others, has cataloged and studied them, though some of the bolder interpretations remain controversial. What we can say is that the digging was deliberate and careful. The squeeze holes and shaped chambers were intentional, not accidental. The tunnels are often found near churches, farmhouses, and old settlements, hinting at some tie to rural Christian-era communities. There is no soot, no hearth, nothing that suggests people lived in them for long. Some scholars connect them to All Souls traditions about the wandering dead. Exploring them is genuinely dangerous. The risk of getting stuck in a squeeze hole, of bad air, of collapse, and because they are unstable and offer no economic value, many are simply sealed. You can read them as practical hideouts or as ritual soul houses, but the honest answer is that no medieval document clearly explains why they were dug. Danger, emptiness, and pure unexplained purpose keep most of them shut. The next cave was sealed on purpose, and reopening it may have carried a price. Number 7. Balankanché Cave. A few kilometers east of the great ruins of Chichen Itza, in the Yucatan of Mexico, there is a cave whose name means throne of the jaguar priest, and inside it, an offering that sat untouched for 1,000 years. Balankanché is a ritual cave, and a long passage leads inward to a chamber dominated by a single astonishing formation. A massive column where a stalactite and a stalagmite have joined, floor to ceiling, into what looks like a great stone tree. To the ancient Maya, that was exactly the point. It evoked the world tree, the axis that connected the layers of the cosmos, and it turned the chamber into a natural, sacred stage. Around the base of that stone tree, archaeologists found dozens of offerings, left in place and undisturbed, incense burners, miniature grinding stones, vessels. Many of the censers carry the face of Tlaloc, the rain and storm god of central Mexico, not originally a Maya deity, and that detail matters. It is evidence of religious influence flowing from central Mexico into the northern Maya lowlands, a blending of traditions at Chichen Itza. The offerings date largely to the Terminal Classic and early Post-Classic, around the 9th to 10th centuries CE. The reason they survived so perfectly is that the chamber had been sealed. Sometime in antiquity, the passage was walled off, and it stayed closed until 1959, when a guide named José Humberto Gómez broke through the masonry and stepped into a room that had been shut for roughly 1,000 years. The archaeologist E. Willis Andrews IV documented the cave and its contents, and here is where the story turns uneasy. After the sealed chamber was opened, modern Maya elders reportedly performed a long propitiation ceremony to appease the guardians of the cave, and accounts describe illness and misfortune tied to disturbing it, feeding a reputation for a curse. For the archaeologist, the reverence has a clear meaning. It is living Maya religion, unbroken continuity from the ancient offerings to the people who still regard the cave as sacred today. Caves like this connect to underground water, and to the Maya that tied them to the watery underworld. You can frame Balankanché as a scientifically precious sealed deposit, or as a sacred place that demands respect and propitiation, and both are true at once. The cave is partly open to visitors now on guided routes, but the deep ritual areas remain protected, the fragile ceramics threatened by the humid, dripping air, and the sense that some part of the cave should stay undisturbed. Between sacred status, fragile offerings, and the cursed tradition, deep access stays limited. The next cave can flood without warning. Number 8. The Sof Omar Caves. In the Bale Zone of southeastern Ethiopia, a river disappears into a mountain and travels underground through one of the longest and most spectacular cave systems in Africa. The Sof Omar Caves stretch over 15 kilometers of surveyed passages, and their defining feature is the Web River, which enters the cave at one point, flows through the darkness beneath the rock, and then emerges again downstream, as if the earth had briefly borrowed it. Inside, the river has carved a natural cathedral. Halls of towering fluted limestone pillars, including a vast space known as the Chamber of Columns. The cave carries 2 layers of sacred meaning. It is named for Sheikh Sof Omar, a Muslim holy man said to have taken refuge there, which gives it deep Islamic significance and makes it a place of pilgrimage. But beneath that lies an older importance, tied to indigenous Oromo religious tradition that predates Islam in the region. For centuries, people have come here to worship, and the 2 faiths meet in the same dark halls. That doubled sacred status means that entering certain areas is not just physically demanding, but culturally sensitive, governed by local guardianship and tradition rather than by any ticket booth. The physical danger is real and specific. The Webb River can rise fast, and flooding through the water sections of the cave can turn a passable route into a trap. Speleologists have mapped much of the system, but the flood-prone passages and the remoteness of the site have kept deeper exploration limited. The limestone was dissolved over long geological time as the river cut its underground course, and the multiple entrances, combined with the river's vanishing and reappearance, create an architecture that feels designed even though it is entirely natural. Bats and cave-adapted animals live in the dark zones, and the pillared halls are counted among the most beautiful cave formations on the continent. Despite its status as natural and cultural heritage, infrastructure at Sof Omar remains minimal, and seasonal rains dramatically change how much water moves through the system, so timing is everything for anyone who wants to go deep. You can approach it as a river-carved geological masterpiece, or as a living sacred site to be entered with care, and both readings demand caution. Between sacred restriction, sudden flooding, and passages that fill with water, much of Sof Omar is rarely entered at all. The next cave is one you can only reach by rope, and people died inside it. Number 9. The Cave of Letters. In the cliffs of the Judean desert, west of the Dead Sea, there is a cave you can only reach by lowering yourself on ropes down a sheer gorge wall, and inside it, the desert has preserved both the words and the bones of people who hid there and never came out. It opens in the face of Nahal Haver, a steep canyon, and it served as a refuge during the Bar Kokhba revolt, the last great Jewish uprising against Rome from 132 to 135 CE. When that revolt failed, the people sheltering in these cliffs were trapped. The cave was excavated principally by the Israeli archaeologist Yigael Yadin in 1960 and 1961, in expeditions that became landmarks of Israeli archaeology. What Yadin's team pulled from the dry rock was breathtaking. There were letters, some bearing the name of Bar Kokhba himself. Shimon Bar Kosiba, the leader of the revolt, his commands preserved on fragile material for nearly 2,000 years. There was the archive of a woman named Babatha, a cache of legal documents about property, marriage, and money that opened an intimate window into ordinary life in Roman period Judea. The desert climate had preserved what almost nowhere else could: papyrus, leather, textiles, baskets, wooden objects. And there were the dead. The team found skeletal remains of refugees who had died in the cave, people who fled here for safety and were besieged. Roman soldiers, it appears, camped on the cliff above, waiting, cutting off escape, letting hunger and thirst do their work. A hoard of bronze ritual objects and vessels was also recovered, some possibly items looted from the Romans during the fighting. Together, the finds tell the human story of a failed rebellion, not as a date in a book, but as letters, household records, and the bones of families who hid in the dark. Later expeditions in the 1990s and 2000s returned with new methods and re-examined the cave, sparking scholarly debate about some of the finds. What no one disputes is the value, or the difficulty. The steep vertical approach and the fragile nature of the deposits mean that modern entry is carefully controlled and entirely dependent on ropes. The cave is one of a cluster of refugee caves used during the revolt, and Israeli authorities watch them constantly against looting, a persistent threat. You can read the cave as a documented rebel refuge and priceless archive, or through the disputes over its later excavations. But either way, the vertical cliff, the human remains, and the irreplaceable documents make casual entry impossible. The next cave has been killing quietly for 2,000 years. Number 10. The Grotta del Cane. Near Naples, in the restless volcanic country called the Campi Flegrei, the Phlegraean Fields, there is a small, unremarkable cave that has been quietly lethal since Roman times. Its name is the Grotta del Cane, the Cave of the Dog, and the name comes from a cruel and simple demonstration. The cave breathes carbon dioxide, gas produced by the volcanic activity underground. Carbon dioxide is heavier than ordinary air, so it does not fill the cave evenly. It pools along the floor, forming an invisible layer of suffocation close to the ground, while the air higher up stays breathable. For centuries, guides made a grim show of it. A dog held down near the floor would collapse, overcome by the gas, while a person standing upright, breathing the good air above, felt nothing. Travelers on the Grand Tour paid to watch it happen. The phenomenon was famous from antiquity onward, described as a natural wonder. And classical writers, including Pliny the Elder, recorded the deadly exhalations of the Phlegraean region, the vents they called moffets. The danger is invisible and, in practice, gives almost no warning. Carbon dioxide displaces the air an animal needs, and something kept low can suffocate within minutes, while a human standing beside it stays unharmed. This is not superstition. It is straightforward and measurable science, and it is a genuine hazard wherever volcanic gas accumulates. The most terrible modern reminder came in 1986 at Lake Nyos in Cameroon, where a massive release of carbon dioxide from a volcanic lake flowed downhill and suffocated well over 1,000 people and their livestock in a single night. The Grotta del Cane is a smaller, older version of the same physics. An early study of the cave actually helped advance the understanding of what miners came to call choke damp. Lake Agnano, which once sat beside the cave, was drained in the 19th century, changing the landscape, but the gas remained. You can see the cave two ways. To modern eyes, it is simply volcanic carbon dioxide pooling in a low space, an explainable danger. To ancient eyes, it was a supernatural breath of death, the earth exhaling something that chose to kill some creatures and spare others. The Campi Flegrei is an active caldera, still closely monitored by volcanologists for ground movement and gas output, and the region remains a real hazard. The cave itself looks like nothing. Its danger lives entirely in that invisible layer along the floor. Because the asphyxiation risk never really goes away, it is not a place anyone casually enters or lingers in. The last cave is the most famous of all, and the Romans believed it was a door to the world of the dead. Number 11. The Sibyl's Cave at Cumae. On the coast of Campania, near Naples, lie the ruins of Cumae, one of the earliest Greek colonies in Italy, founded around the 8th century BCE by settlers from Euboea. Cut into the soft, volcanic tuff of the Acropolis, there is a long, strange gallery, and for 100 years people have known it as the Antro della Sibylla, the Cave of the Sibyl. It runs about 130 meters, with a distinctive high trapezoidal cross-section, its ceiling angling to a point, and a row of side openings that let bars of daylight fall across the stone floor, so that walking its length, you pass through alternating shafts of light and pools of shadow. It is one of the most atmospheric ancient spaces in all of Italy. The gallery was excavated and identified by the archaeologist Amedeo Maiuri in the 1920s and 30s, who connected it to the most famous prophetess of the ancient world. The Cumaean Sibyl was a legendary oracle of Apollo, and in Virgil's Aeneid, in Book 6, the hero Aeneas comes to Cumae to consult her before descending into the Underworld, which lay, in Roman belief, just nearby. The Sibyl was tied to the Sibylline books, prophetic texts that Rome consulted in moments of crisis, and the nearby Lake Avernus was regarded as an actual entrance to the realm of the dead, so the whole landscape carried the weight of the underworld. But here the archaeology and the myth begin to argue. Many scholars now think the trapezoidal gallery was not originally an oracle's sanctuary at all. Its shape and construction look more like a military or civic passage, part of the fortifications or workings of the site. Later romantically re-identified as the Sibyl's Grotto because it matched Virgil's evocative description so well. The debate has not been settled. The tuff of Cumae was easy to carve, which allowed extensive ancient tunneling across the Acropolis, and above the gallery stood temples to Apollo and Jupiter. Nearby, the Roman general Agrippa built naval works, linking the lakes into a militarized landscape. Another reason to suspect the gallery had a practical purpose. The Sibyl herself lived on in stories. The tale of the prophecy she offered and withheld, and the grim legend, told by Ovid and Petronius, of a woman granted centuries of life, but not eternal youth, shriveling away until she wished only to die. Excavation of the gallery revealed the carved rock, but no oracular apparatus, no machinery of prophecy, so the identification rests largely on matching the myth to the dramatic setting. Around it, the volcanic landscape of steaming vents and the dark waters of Avernus made an ideal gateway to the dead. Whether it was truly the seat of the oracle or a defensive corridor dressed in legend, the blend of real ancient engineering, powerful myth, and underworld association keeps it iconic. And it points to a question that runs beneath all 11 of these places. Look at these 11 caves together, and a pattern rises out of them that is almost too consistent to be coincidence. Nearly every ancient culture treated holes in the ground as entrances to another world. The Greeks had catabasis, the ritual descent into the underworld, acted out at Trophonius and imagined at Cumae. The Maya had Xibalba, the realm of the dead reached through caves like Naj Tunich and Balankanché. The Arabs of Yemen saw a pit like Barhout as a prison for spirits. Different continents, different gods, the same instinct. Down is not just down. Down is across, into somewhere else. The same motifs repeat. The rope, the descent, the crossing of a threshold. Caves as places of prophecy, where oracles spoke. Caves as places of the dead, of sacrifice and offering. Caves as refuges for the desperate, from Bar Kokhba's rebels to the diggers of the Erdstall. Water appears again and again, tied to the underworld and to real danger, at Sof Omar and Balankanché. And nearly everywhere there are guardians, priests, tribes, holy men, communities who control who may enter and who may not. Sacred restriction was the ancient world's way of writing "do not enter," and often it was protecting people from something genuinely lethal. The darkness, the silence, the disorientation of these spaces can bend the mind, which is why so many cultures demanded purification before entry, a way of managing the fear. The instinct to fear the hollow earth is one of the most universal things about us, and it turns caves into stages for both transformation and terror. But beneath every myth on this list, the physical dangers are painfully real. Strip away the gods and the spirits, and these caves are still trying to kill you, for reasons a scientist can name precisely. The first is gas. Carbon dioxide pools on cave floors, exactly as it does in the Grotta del Cane, invisible and heavier than air, and it can suffocate before you understand anything is wrong. Hydrogen sulfide, the poison that fills Movile Cave, is lethal at surprisingly low concentrations and can deaden your sense of smell, so you cannot even detect it. Sealed or gas-rich chambers can be starved of oxygen entirely. In 1986, Lake Nyos showed the world what volcanic carbon dioxide can do when it escapes in bulk, killing more than 1,000 people in a night. Then, there is water. Underground rivers like the Web at Sof Omar can rise without warning and drown a passage in minutes. There are vertical shafts and sheer drops. At Tyos, at Barhout, at the Cave of Letters, where a single slip is fatal. There is collapse and instability in narrow tunnels like the Erdstall, and the simple panicking danger of getting physically stuck in a squeeze hole with the rock pressing on your chest. There is disorientation, the ease of getting hopelessly lost in a labyrinth of passages, and the slow drain of cold and damp that leads to hypothermia. On top of all that, some caves hold fragile deposits that human presence destroys, painted walls that decay, sealed offerings that crumble, isolated ecosystems that contamination could wipe out, and even unknown microbes. This is why permits and locked gates exist, not only to keep people safe from the cave, but to keep the cave safe from people. Modern instruments now reveal dangers the ancients could only sense as dread. And some of these caves still guard questions we cannot answer. For all our technology, these 11 places are full of open questions. We still do not know the true location of the Trophonius Oracle Chamber, buried somewhere beneath a medieval castle, and we do not know whether gases played any part in the terror it produced. We do not know the real purpose of the Erdstall Tunnels, why thousands of them were dug with such care only to lead nowhere, and why they were left so completely empty. We cannot say whether Cueva de los Tallos holds any genuine ancient use we have missed, or where its legend of a metal library truly came from. The biology of Movile Cave is still only partly mapped, and we do not yet know everything it can teach us about the possibility of life beyond Earth. We will never fully read the portions of Naj Tunich that the Vandals destroyed in 1989, and we can only estimate how much Maya knowledge vanished with them. We still argue over whether the gallery at Cumae was an oracle's sanctuary or a soldier's corridor. There are passages at Sof Omar that lie beyond the floodwaters, unexplored. There are Judean refuge caves still unexcavated, and there may be more sealed chambers like Balankanché waiting behind their walls. We are not even certain exactly how old the Barhout sinkhole is. Each of these gaps is a place where curiosity presses against caution, and where the honest answer is that we do not know and may choose never to find out. Come back, at the end, to the simplest image, a narrow hole in the ground, and a person standing at its edge. We live in an age that can reach almost anywhere. We can dive the flooded passages, rappel the sheer shafts, monitor the poison air, light the deepest dark, and still, again and again, we choose not to enter. Sometimes the reason is safety, because some air simply kills, and no discovery is worth a lungful of it. Sometimes the reason is preservation, because some deposits die the moment we touch them. Some paintings fade in our breath. Some sealed rooms are ruined by being opened. And sometimes the reason is respect. These caves still belong, in a real sense, to living people. The Shuar guarding the shaft at Tyos, the Maya who honor Balankanché, the communities of Ethiopia and Yemen who hold their sacred ground. Archaeology has slowly shifted from conquest toward restraint, from taking to leaving alone. Naj Tunich taught us what opening can destroy. Balankanché taught us what reverence can preserve. The lost pit of Trophonius may be a mystery better left unsolved, and even the Well of Barhout, once finally entered, turned out to be mostly ordinary. Its terror living in the story more than in the stone. Perhaps that is the real lesson of every cave on this list, that refusing to enter is sometimes not fear, but wisdom, that not knowing can be its own form of protection, and that the questions themselves are worth keeping. The cave is a mirror. It shows us our curiosity and our dread at once, and the thin line between exploring a place and desecrating it. So we stand at the mouth, and we let the light stop where the darkness begins, and some doors we simply leave shut.